Jeff, it's just that time of the year when it's really hard to beat a Senko. This time of the year, the fish start moving up, the fish are shallow. A lot of times you have really calm days, and there's just really not a stealthier, more natural approach than throwing a Senko. So today we're gonna do a Senko breakdown. I'm gonna give 3 tips that are really going to improve your Senko fishing. And don't worry, in Ben's style, I'm probably gonna rabbit hole every tip. So it'll probably turn into a long episode of Senko fishing. So if you want to discuss one of the most boring ways to fish, but undoubtedly one of the most effective ways to fish, let's dive into all things Senkos. Let's go. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle.
Oh, what a stud.
Yeah. Look at that.
That was sick.
Cheers, my friends. Happy Sunday. All right, guys, some breaking news. What's new this week at the Hookup Tackle?
What a beautiful post-storm fish.
Look at that.
Look at that gut on that. That's a nice fish.
Welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined by Jeffrey the King. Jeff, happy morning.
What's up to you, boss?
How are you?
Pretty great.
You excited for a Senko conversation?
You know, Senkos are just amazing.
So this is one of those things when I was actually tournament fishing, I had thousands of bags of Senkos.
I can only imagine.
And this was something that was important pretty much everywhere I went. Every time I went out, Senko played some type of role, whether it was winter, spring, summer, but especially in the spring, right? Especially when those fish are moving shallow, they're staging, they're moving to secondary points, they're moving to the back of creek. Like anytime those fish kind of push up, Senko's just so hard to beat anywhere in the country.
Oh yeah.
Right? So I thought today we would have this conversation because there are things that I've seen over the years, whether it was when I was guiding or here in the shop or, you know, just fun fishing, right? My own experiences that can really improve not just the bites that you get, but the land ratio of the fish that you get too. Senko to me is just probably the most boring way to fish in the spring. Well, drop shot.
Oh, there it is.
Would be the most boring way to fish in the spring because you'd be out in deep water and you should be shallow, right? But when it comes to shallow fishing, like I think everybody dreams of like flipping, punching, like spinnerbait, square bill, right? Like fun power fishing stuff. And Senko is just like slow and methodical. But the reality is that not every day is set up and structured to where you could just go and plow them. Like more days than not, the fish are more lethargic than they are active.
Yeah.
So it's just next to impossible to beat a Senko for just pure fish catching, right? And it catches fish of all sizes from, you know, little pond fish all the way up to, you know, giants, double-digit fish, right? So today we're gonna break down the Senko. We're gonna dive down 3 different rabbit holes, okay? So let's start.
Okay.
Shall we start? Did I get everybody super juiced on
juiced
Senko
right
fishing because I said it's so boring?
This is great.
Yeah, well, look, some ways of fishing are just super exciting, and other ways just, it is what it is, right? It is a bait that's designed to fall very slowly, weightless. Like,
That's
it's
it.
just, it's slow, right? So, I mean, why don't we talk about that? Just in case, look, if you're new to bass fishing and you're looking to get a lure, the reality is
This is it.
I'm in a store full of some of the most amazing tackle in the world, and the only lure you really need is this one.
That's the one.
You could probably just use this 365 days a year and catch fish, right? But God, you'd probably quit fishing very quick because it's so boring. So here's a Senko, probably the most knocked off bait in the world. And again, for good reason. It just flat catches fish, and it's an important tool when you need this style bait. Now, the Senko is designed as a bait that has a horizontal fall. So where most baits, you throw them in the water, they sink kind of, you know, more vertical. This is a bait that sinks horizontally, right? So it has this little shimmy, and as it moves down, it quivers too. So that tail and front is just back there kind of quivering. It's just a super natural bait that's just falling differently than majority of baits out there, right? If everybody else is throwing a Texas rig or whatever, everything's kind of falling nose, 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 nose. And all of a sudden this thing comes and it's just really slowly quivering down. It's just so natural. As it falls, it gets bit, right? So it stays in the strike zone a lot longer than other baits that just kind of fall out, right? So that's essentially what we're getting with a Senko. Now, let's start diving down some rabbit holes. So the first rabbit hole, or the first tip, is going to be, let's just call it rigging. Okay, so we're going to put a lot of stuff into this first little category. Okay, and that's rigging. Now, rigging is going to be anywhere from hooks to sleeves to weights. We're just going to dive through all of it. Okay, I'm going to make this really, really fast. Okay, so Senkos, first off, come in a bunch of different sizes, right? I mean, there's a 5-inch, there's a 4-inch, there's a 6-inch, a 7-inch, there's a 3-inch. So choose the size that's going to be most applicable to your waters, okay? I would say that the 5-inch Senko is probably the standard Senko. Okay, we sell most of these, more colors are made in these. You can pretty much take a 5-inch Senko and throw it anywhere in the country, from a pond to a Great Lake, and you're gonna catch a fish on it. Generally speaking, when the fish get a little bit bigger, or they're feeding a little bit bigger bait, that's when you can jump up to a 6-inch Senko. When you need something even more massive, then you can jump up to a 7-inch Senko. When you're downsizing, when you're trying to get real finesse, you're fishing a small little pond, that's when like a little 4-inch Senko can be good. Okay, probably the best pond bait of all time, a little 4-inch Senko. And then they make a 3-inch Senko as well for, you know, just ultra finesse, little streams, little creeks, that kind of stuff. And then every Senko like has its own rabbit hole, right? There's skinny ones and pro Senkos and fat, like, so, you know, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you can. But day in and day out, a 5-inch Senko is really kind of the standard Senko. Okay, now let's talk about riggings, and the same hooks, the same riggings are going to apply to every size. You might just want to downsize or upsize depending on which one we talk about. So let's start with hooks. Now, Jeff, do you fish a Senko very often?
I probably haven't fished a Senko in over a decade.
Okay. When you used to fish a Senko,
yep,
right? Did you used to fish it just like unweighted Texas rig, or did you used to fish it wacky rigged?
Wacky. I don't think I ever fished a Texas rig.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So
always wacky.
Okay. So this is kind of, I would say, the perfect divider amongst most anglers. I'd say probably half of the anglers start with a wacky rig, and half of the anglers start with just an unweighted Texas rig. Okay. There's not a right or a wrong unless the fish are telling you you're wrong, right? So if you're not getting bit, wrong. Okay. If you're catching fish, right. So the difference is if you go weightless Texas rig, you're going to be able to cast it a little bit quicker because you're going to have more hook that's kind of pulling it down, so it's going to sink a little bit faster. When you go with a wacky rig, you're going to have just a little bit more life, so you're going to get just a little bit more this kind of like side to side kind of wobble out of it versus more just a tail wobble with the Texas rig. So you are going to get two different looks out of the bait, and sometimes they want just a little bit more action, and sometimes they want just that little bit less action. So keep in mind, if you're not getting bit on one, maybe just try a different rigging, throw back, and sometimes they will eat one exponentially better than the other, right? So keep that in mind as well. So let's start with wacky rigging, since that's the way you liked to fish, okay? So let me grab some hooks. We're going to dive down a little bit of a hook rabbit hole here, and we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but let's dive in. Now, chances are, when you started Senko fishing and you grabbed a wacky hook, you probably grabbed a hook that looked a lot like this one.
Actually, I did not.
Oh, good.
I was grabbing a circle hook.
Oh, right out of the gate, you chose wiser than where a lot of people start. Good for you, Jeff. This is why you're the king, and the rest of us are just peons. So this is a hook that a lot of people start with. This is one of those problem hooks. I get a lot of shit for talking shit about Gamakatsu hooks, but there are just some hooks that suck that you should never use, and put this at the top of your list, okay? So if you guys are using this hook for wacky rigs, stop. This is why you're not landing most of your bites, okay? This was a hook that was designed for this technique to wacky rig, but the reason why this hook is a challenge, and this is, I really don't care what hook you guys use. I just want to talk about the hook so you understand what's happening. If you're finding that you're getting bit on a wacky rig and you're not landing them, chances are your hook is just not right. So if you look at this hook, whether it's the weed guard one or not, your knot is here, right? So you're pulling, when you set the hook, you're pulling the hook this way. There's just no room for the hook to hook them. So when you jerk, you're basically just going to kind of skin hook them, and so you'll have them until they jump, and then it throws your Senko, and then gone they go. So your only chance is that they just get this so far down in the crusher that it had nowhere to go but actually penetrate through the barb. Okay, so let's replace this hook. Okay, gone is that one. Throwing that one out.
See you later.
Okay? There's too many good options to be using junky hooks. Okay, so everybody makes a good hook now, including Gamakatsu. So if you're a Gamakatsu fan, don't worry, you have some great options. So in the G Finesse, Shin Fukai has basically the updated version of that hook. This is the Weedless Wacky. This is a good one. Simple little tweaks, a little bit wider gap, a little change in the eye, and now all of a sudden when you set the hook, there's plenty of hook to penetrate. So this is a great one. Another good one is this guy. So this is the G Finesse Weedless Stinger. This is a style hook that I usually prefer to go with. So this is a great one. Decoy makes a good one. Ryugi makes the Talismen, which is a super popular one. I know Kenta and all those guys love this hook for wacky rig stuff, so this is a really good one. There's a regular guard, a heavy guard, so you guys can play with different hooks. Day in and day out, I usually just mess with this one, Owner Sniper Finesse. So this has kind of been the hook that I've been using for a long time. I've had good luck with it, so I just stay, right? And that's the biggest thing I'll tell you with hooks, line, you know, any of this. If you're having success, don't change. Right? So whatever is working for you, keep going. When you start having problems, that's when you start diagnosing how to adjust, right? If you're losing fish, it's probably because the hook didn't penetrate. It's either a hook set, could be rod, but I usually start at the hook and then work towards the angler is the easiest way to go. But this is a great hook. It's just, there's plenty of gap between the eye and the hook point, so when I set the hook, it hooks them, right? So that's really what it is. That's what this all comes down to. It's just how it hooks the fish. Now, moving on from hooks, let's talk about accessories. So when you wacky rig, okay, did you used to use rings? I know this is going back a long time.
No,
or
sir.
was that kind of before the time for you?
Before.
Okay. So,
I mean, I think there were rings, but I didn't quite understand them, so
yeah.
I just said, screw it, we're just gonna hook the worm.
Yeah. Well, here, let's do this. I have.
Oh.
I wasn't going to talk about rods yet.
Okay.
Oh, I'm still not going to talk about rods, but I have.
Here we go.
I grabbed one out of the boat and I had a hook on there, so let's just use this hook. Okay. Yeah, it's enough line. That'll work. Okay. So here we go. Typically, if you are going to rig a Senko or wacky rig a Senko, right? You are going to, Jeff, if you're going to rig this, are you going to put it on like this? Or are you going to put it on like this?
The first way, sir.
Okay. So this is a really important thing. So you guys know that in this world, there are tons of accessories, right? There's O-rings, there's tubes, there's all kinds of, you know, things like this that you can attach to your worm that's designed to kind of like little collars, right? Here's the tip. I don't care what you guys use. I like to use tubes. Okay, so these are by G7. Decoy makes one that you can cut. These are already pre-cut. They're just little tubes. You basically just get, you know, you get a little set of pliers. You put the tube in, you open it up, you stick it on there, and it drops in there. The reason I like these tubes is because it allows me to hook properly. Okay, so let me show you what I'm talking about. This is an untubed worm. Okay, so anytime you use an untubed worm, it's the best way to go. Problem is that you're gonna throw these off, you're gonna lose them when a fish hooks. You're not gonna get a lot of life. You're gonna get one fish per bait if you're lucky. Okay, so you're gonna plow through baits. But if you were to use one that's unrigged, what you want to do on a Senko is you want to go through this little egg sac area here, like right through the middle. Now the Senko has kind of lines on it, and then you'll see GYB on top, Gary Yamamoto Custom Baits. Now I'm super like OCD on this stuff. I always want that GYB to be on the top. Okay, so there's my rigging, just like that. Okay, so this is how you're going to wacky rig with no tube. Okay, and what that's going to do is you're going to throw it out. This thing is going to sink down, right? And then as you move it, you're pulling it hook forward, right? This is important. I'm going to come back to why this is important. Okay, so you're pulling this hook forward. If you were to rig it this way, like nobody would rig it this way if they're by itself, right? This would be kind of ridiculous because it's falling like this, and then when you pull it, you're pulling it this way, and then it's falling like this. Like nobody would actually do that, right? But what I find is that when people use O-rings, they forget how you want to do it. So here's one that I have pre-rigged on O-rings. This is one of those G7 tubes, right? So many times, dude, I see people put a little O-ring or a tube, and if you put an O-ring, you almost have to do this. Now, if you're using O-rings, you could do 2 O-rings and you can cross them to get the same effect. Don't come in here and put this under the O-ring like that, okay? Because what's gonna happen is you're gonna lose a lot of fish this way. This is a great way of doing it. I'd probably do it this way. Big side down, underneath. This is a good way of doing it if you're like Nico rigging it. So if you're gonna put a nail weight down here and you're actually trying to pull this thing where this is on the bottom and this tail is just kind of quivering it, then this is a good way of doing it because you want the worm to move like this. But as an unweighted wacky rig, you don't want this thing falling like this because the hook, there's too much potential for things to wrap. You don't get the hook set properly, right? So what I would recommend doing, and the reason why I like these tubes, is put the tube where it goes, and then you can take your hook and go through the tube. So I just hook it directly right through the tube and out. Okay, so the tube is actually hooked on my hook. Okay, it keeps it stable. I'm gonna get a lot more life out of my Senko. And my hook is in the correct position now because it's sinking down like this. When I pull it, it's pulling it correctly, it's sinking back down. It's just a much more lifelike, natural way of presenting it. Now, if you're using a hook with like these big strands, you can cut these strands if you don't want them. You can actually use these strands if you want. You can kind of poke them in the worm, and this will kind of create like a weed guard for you if you want to create more of a weedless presentation. You can do whatever you want with those little strands, right? Most of the time, if I'm wacky rigging, I just cut them off or do something like this where I just kind of bury them, okay? But there you go. Make sure your hook is in the correct alignment. You're gonna have a much better bite ratio because your bait's gonna fall better. You're also gonna have a much better land ratio. Now, quick little tip on a Senko. Sometimes, you know, in the spring, especially when you see shad in the shallows, you see bluegill in the shallows, you see a lot of things like chartreuse tails, right? Like bluegills have that little faint tail, shad have that little faint tail. Senkos are really full of salt, okay? So if you take your fingers, and this is good on any of these colors, especially like the green pumpkins, watermelons, if you take your fingers and you just squeeze back here at the end, okay? I'm just kind of squeezing the salt out with my oils. What's gonna happen is all that salt comes out at the tip, and when you put this in the water now, it's going to have a little bit of a faint, almost chartreuse tip to it. Okay, so in essence, you've changed the color tone without like dipping it in chartreuse. It's much more muted, much more natural, right? So you're just gonna pull all that color out and you're gonna get that little chartreuse tail on there. Sometimes that can make a difference as well, okay? Now, let's talk about, set that over here for a minute. Let's talk about weightless Texas rig, okay? Now this is, I would say, for me, probably 90% of the time I use weightless Texas rig. I'm not a big fan of wacky rig. I'll do it when I have to get bit, but if I have the option of getting them on a 4/0 hook instead of a size 1 hook, count me in, right? And by the way, on these, where'd it go? As far as hook sizes go, anywhere from a 4 to a 2/0, really, depending on the size of your worm. So on a 5-inch, I like a 1 or 1/0. Those are usually the best sizes. If I go up to a 6-inch, then a 1/0 or 2/0. If I go down to a 4, then usually a size 2 or a 4 is good on hook size, okay? Now, let's talk about the other way, the Weedless Texas rig. These are the two hooks that I recommend. This is the hook that I've been using for ages and ages and ages. This is an owner offset worm, wide gap. Ryugi makes a great one in the Infinity hook. That would be a good one. Zappu bellows hook would be a good one. This is an amazing hook too from Gamakatsu. This is a Gamakatsu hybrid worm hook. I like this little longer shank versus more of a traditional like big EWG gap. I just like less like sunkenness on the hook. One of the reasons why I really like this owner is it's a XXX. So, you know, again, use whatever hook you have confidence in. For a 5-inch, I almost always use a 4/0. So you could get away with a 4/0 or a 5/0 and then just adjust your sizing going down. But I like these heavier gauge hooks because they're a little heavier in weight, right? Which helps pull my Senko down just a little bit, right? But the big thing is just make sure that whichever hook you're choosing, that your hook point has plenty of gap and room from your eye, so that when you set the hook, there's plenty of hook to go through, okay? And then as far as rigging, this is super simple, guys, just like any other Texas rig. You're gonna throw it in, you're gonna set it up, and I don't really texpose a Senko, okay? I pretty much just, I might just go take my hook and make a channel all the way through my Senko, just so it's kind of channeled, but I pretty much just leave it buried in there, right? So this will allow me to throw it in any cover I want to throw it in, but this is so soft, right? And I'm going to be using a pretty good line. So my hook set, this has no problem going through that Senko. I mean, the Senko's probably going to tear, right? So I'm not going to get as much life out of the Texas rig, but I like doing this because I can really put it around heavier cover and do it that way. As far as other rigging tips go, I would say that takes up, that weightless Senko probably takes up 99% of the time for me, right? But there are times where maybe the wind's just blowing. You need a little bit of weight on there. You'll see a lot of guys, like especially in Florida and stuff early in the season, they'll use like really light little bullet weights, like a 16th ounce or 32nd ounce little tungsten that you can put ahead of the Senko, and that'll just help kind of keep it down a little bit more if it's real breezy. Because if it's unweighted, a lot of times you throw out and the wind just kind of pulls your line. It just kind of pulls the Senko a little bit. So sometimes you need a little bit of weight just to kind of get it to the bottom so you can do something like this. Don't be afraid to throw it on a free rig. Senko's an amazing free rig bait, but it gets super overlooked by Dolive beavers and, you know, all the normal stuff that we do. But remember, a Senko's a horizontal falling bait. So on a free rig, if you create that separation, it's gonna have that great horizontal fall in deeper water too. So usually if I have to go to a weight, I go to a free rig type thing. And then another little tip is don't be afraid to add one of these. A Senko is a great bait to add a rattle. So this is a Zappu bone rattle. It's made out of a bone ABS material. There's all kinds of different rattles you can do, glass rattles or whatever. I really like this one because it's got a unique sound. I don't even know if you can hear it. Can you hear it, Jeff? It's super subtle, right? It's just two little tungsten beads in there surrounded by this bone, so it's not real loud. A lot of times when you use a glass rattle, it's really loud, really intense, right? But when you're throwing something like a Senko, you're not trying to be intense. You're trying to just be like super chill, right? So usually what I would do if I'm gonna add the rattle, you can put it here in the middle. Typically what I do is before I rig my Senko, I'll insert it in the front. Okay, so I like to just kind of push it straight through, and I'll just keep pushing it down until I've given myself enough room. So my rattle now is kind of like here, right? But now when I move this, I get just that little bit of, again, I don't know if you can hear it, Jeff. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but that'll let me kind of do the same rigging on this guy, right? It still lets me put this, you know, wherever I want to put it in any of the cover, but as it's falling, it doesn't really alter the fall. But then as I give it a little twitch and have it move, I get just that little bit of, you know, knock, knock, and then it's back to being real quiet. So don't be afraid to alter with it, play with it. But hopefully those rigging tips will help you guys land more. Let's jump over to the next one. All right, so the next tip, we're gonna call this rabbit hole number 2, is choosing the correct rod, okay? So as far as line goes, almost always I'm throwing like 14, 16 pound. Those are like the most universal Senko sizes, right? So across the board, those are the best. If you need heavier, go to 20. Remember, the heavier the line, the more it's, or the slower it's going to sink. So the more drag resistant, it's just creating a harder way for the Senko to sink. So if you want it to be really slow sinking, go to 20. All right, if you want to sink faster, go to 8 or 7, right? And roll the dice, see what happens. So when it comes to throwing a Senko, my number 1 favorite rod for throwing it is this guy. It's the Megabass Destroyer X Bites. So it's basically a 7-1, kind of medium plus medium, almost a medium heavy, right? But really, if I was in NRX, it'd be like an 893. That's a great Senko, 5-inch Senko rod. I'm looking for a rod that's got a soft tip, but a fast action still, right? A lot of power, but a relatively soft tip that bounces back really quick. Okay, so I like that because you need that soft tip to really make delicate presentation. Remember, a Senko, a 5-inch Senko with a hook is probably about almost half an ounce, I would say. It's pretty full of salt. So it'll throw good as long as your gear is right, but you still want it to be finesse. A lot of times you're skipping up underneath a dock, or you're making a real delicate presentation where in like calm water, and you want it to land real softly and just kind of boom, and then just real slowly sink down. I find that this rod really does that incredibly well. I like an 8-to-1 reel. 7-to-1 is fine, but the high gear ratio is really important to the Senko because 9 times out of 10, I just kind of pitched down through that pocket and I engaged it, and I'm just going to see my line starting to swim out. Sometimes you feel them just go thunk and eat it, but most of the time it's a visual eat. Most of the time you've thrown it out and it's sinking, and then your line just starts moving. And I like that faster gear ratio to be able to pick it up and set the hook and make sure I get a good hook set in them. Okay. Also, a lot of times with Senko fishing, you're target specific casting. It's a really slow sinking bait. So it would take you forever to just make a huge long cast down a point and like work it back. Like it would literally be like a 30-minute cast to do it right. So most of the time we're target specific, right? I'm gonna throw at that dock, that tree, this little pocket, off this little secondary point, right? Make my little cast, I let it sink, and the magic in the Senko is on the sink. So almost always I let it sink to the bottom. Hopefully a fish is eating it on the initial fall and my line's moving. If it hasn't, then I usually just wind in the slack. I usually just kind of give it a couple little hops, let it sink back to the bottom. If I feel like I'm in a good place, then maybe I'll wind in the slack and give it a couple hops again, let it sink to the bottom. And if nothing's really eating it, then I'm usually winding it back in and I'm throwing to the next target. It's a pretty fast way to fish, even though it's taking it a long time to sink down to the bottom. Okay, now here's where the tip comes in. Sometimes you need that Senko to fall literally perfectly straight. Okay, now anytime you're throwing a bait casting rod, when this reel comes off the line, right, it's going to be coily. So you just get all these coils in it. So I make my beautiful cast, right? Even if I'm like pulling line off to let it sink down naturally, the line's coily and it's creating a drag. It's creating a certain amount of drag on that Senko that's preventing the Senko from having a straight vertical fall. Okay, so let's say I'm throwing to a dock piling, right? So here's like a pillar for a dock, and I want to throw my Senko here and have it sink straight down this pillar. Well, if my boat's over here and I threw and it landed here and I'm using a bait caster, because of the coils and the drag and just what a bait caster creates, as this Senko is falling, it's kind of pulling it out. And by the time it lands to the bottom, it's usually several feet away from where you actually were trying to get it, right? Very rarely can you throw here and actually have it sink straight down. I have a rod in my boat that I literally use like 1 month a year. And I know this is probably a little crazy for most people, but it's a rod that is an important rod when I need it, okay? And this is a heavy spinning rod, okay? Now this happens to be a TS Destroyer, which would be a literal heavy, but you could use a medium heavy something that's a little bit stronger, more of a true like tube rod if you guys have one, a jig and worm rod, but something that I can rig with some heavier line that I can use on a spinning rod instead of a casting rod. Okay, now what a spinning rod will do is it'll allow me to throw that Senko and then just keep the bail open, and because this line doesn't really coil and it just kind of falls off the spool, that Senko has a much truer fall to it. So I can really be more specific with the fall down using a spinning rod than I can a casting rod. And there's times, dude, the first term I ever went on a Senko, I was fishing kind of like late 90s where I learned this. My team fishing partner, Phil, at the time, there was literally like 50 boats flipping these trees, right? Everybody's flipping with braid, 20-pound fluoro, 25-pound fluoro. Everybody's throwing a Senko, nobody's catching one. Phil's jacking them left and right. And it wasn't until I switched to doing what he was doing that I started catching him too. The difference it made flipping with a spinning rod versus flipping with a casting rod was night and day. Those fish just wanted that thing to fall straight like this, just a straight vertical fall instead of, you know, kind of moving out of the strike zone. You could literally keep it right in that structure the whole time and get a lot more bites. So it's not a lot of fun to flip with a spinning rod, right? You don't have the power and the oomph, and it's just not as cool. But sometimes you get a lot more bites using a spinning rod with the Senko. I'll almost always Texas rig it this way, but you can use it like this as well with a little Wacky. You can skip, you can do different things with it, but try that if you need it. If you are convinced like, dude, there's fish here, I don't know why I'm not catching them, try throwing it on a spinning rod. I think you guys will find that sometimes that different presentation of that bait actually going straight down instead of getting pulled out can make a difference in your bites. All right, and finally, Jeff, tip number 3 is don't be afraid to try a Senko alternative. Okay, now, we talked about the Senko being probably the most knocked off bait ever. I'm not talking about using a Senko knockoff. Oh. Like, there's not a time I could ever think where I'm not getting bit on a Senko and I think, man, if only I had a Yum Dinger. Right, you know what I mean? Or a Sticko, or I don't know, whatever other stupid knockoff there is, right? So if they want a Senko, they want a Senko, but sometimes those fish have seen a lot of the same thing, or they want something just a little bit different. Maybe you've fished through an area and you've caught a bunch and you want to go back through and they're not eating the Senko anymore, or maybe 35 Senko fishermen just went in front of you. Mm-hmm. The fish are where they are, right? Because nature is putting them in these shallow pockets or these secondary points or whatever, but they're not falling for this little slow Senko deal anymore, right? So don't be afraid to play with some alternatives. I'm going to show you some of our favorite alternatives, maybe just to spark some interest, right? So usually my go-to alternative for a Senko would be one of these. So these are OSP Dolive Sticks. Now they make 2 versions. They make a regular version and a fat. We talk about this bait all the time. The Dolive Stick is essentially just a Senko fluke hybrid, if you will. Okay, so it was designed to have that same kind of shimmy fall and vertical fall as a Senko, but with more of like a, you know, fluky shad type tail. Okay, now Dolive sticks are basically 2 different plastics put together. It's a heavier salt content on the bottom, lighter salt content on the top, and that heavier content keeps it keeled and keeps it pulling so that it has that horizontal fall. But you can also twitch this like a fluke and it will move just like a fluke, but then it will continue to have that horizontal shimmy. So most flukes, when you use them, are great on the twitch, but then when you kill them, they just kind of spiral dive down. Senko is great on the fall, and it can twitch a little bit, but a lot of times it just kind of darts up or does something. This kind of blends those 2 worlds, okay? So it lets you, you know, present it like this, and then every once in a while just give it a couple pops, and it will dart left and right like a jerkbait or a fluke, and then fall back down. So as far as choosing between the sizes, I usually think of the fat as like my power fishing option, and the regular is like my finesse fishing option. Okay, so I usually go with the fat. That's usually my go-to for casting gear. I can put it on the same 4/0 or 5/0 hook that I was using on the Senko and just pitch it around trees and pockets, and it just has a little bit more meat. It's easy to cast, has a great fall. If I'm trying to be super subtle, I'll go to the regular Dolive stick. Now, some other really good options. The Juster Stick is a super popular option in Japan, 100% under the radar in the USA. So if you guys want something that nobody else is throwing, here you go. You're welcome. Okay, so this is a great little bait. It can be fished on a ball head, but it's really designed to be fished on just a horizontal fall, right? So let me take one out and show this to you guys. This is made by Owner Japan. In Japan, it's GetNet or Cultiva. Let's see if I can open it.
You okay over there?
Bulletproof bag.
They didn't want you opening this one.
Huh. Maybe this is the universe telling me a different color. Let's try this color.
Why do the Japanese keep doing that?
Oh, they just love to mess with me. Oh yeah, it didn't want me to use a shad pattern. It wanted me to use a dark pumpkin color. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? This is what I wanted anyways.
Oh, I see.
Psych on you, universe. All right, here you go. Here's the Juster Stick. So again, similar to the Dolive Stick that we just looked at, right? It's got this kind of unique, heavily salted body that's going to pull down, but then it has this kind of like thin spadish shad tail that's going to create a quiver, right? So this one I find has more of a nose down fall than the Dolive Stick. I think the Dolive Stick falls more horizontally, but this just has this really great action. You hardly twitch it at all or move your rod tip, and that tail just really vibrates hard, okay? So this could be a great alternative for you guys. That's the Juster Stick. A couple other options that are pretty cool. Deps makes a really good one called the Rebound Stick. Reaction Innovations also makes a worm just like this. This is a good Wacky rig worm. Okay, so if you're looking for an alternative for a Wacky rig, you can see it's thinner in the middle. It's more bulbous on both ends. So you can Wacky rig it right there, and you're gonna get this, just a much more exaggerated movement as it falls. So if you want something with even more spice to your life, this could be something good. And it comes in a bunch of sizes too. So 6-inch would kind of be my standard size in this one. But there's a 7-inch, there's a 5-inch, right? So you can really play with the Rebound Stick. So that could be a good option. Imakatsu makes one called the Java Shad. So we've talked about this bait a lot as well. It comes in a bunch of sizes, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. 5.5 is probably the most logical, all-purpose size. Let's see if I can get one out. Did they want me to use green pumpkin? Universe, do you want me to use green pumpkin? If so, let me in. I love Ziplocs, don't they? All right, so here's a look at the Java Shad. Now, we've talked about this bait before, continues to go under the radar. Essentially, it looks a lot like a Senko, but it also has this kind of more of a pin tail to it. What's interesting about a Java Shad is that it has these little kind of grooves here, right? And these grooves are designed to be cut or kept. So you can cut these grooves out if you want more snaky movement. You can keep them in if you want it to be tight. So just right out of the package like this, it's gonna have a beautiful, just kind of natural shimmy horizontal fall. But if you want to have more life, you can literally just remove some of these grooves. You can either take your fingernails or you can use scissors, right? And I can literally just take some of these grooves out. And now I've created a joint, so now my back end is gonna be much more flexible, right? So I'm gonna create a little different shimmy to it as it falls, so now I'm gonna get a little bit more life. If I want even more, I can continue to just go down the worm and take these grooves out, right? So it's basically giving you some customization options to give the bait more life or less life. Okay, so now I have an articulated head and an articulated tail, right? So you can see how much more snaky it's getting. So this will apply if you're going to be like twitching it. So if it's gonna fall, it's gonna have now a wider fall. And as I twitch it, it's gonna have this little like kickback to it now too, where it's gonna move like that, a little snakier. So a pretty cool bait, right? There's a lot of cool things you could do to it. That's the Java Shad. A couple more just to throw out there to you. Duo and Raid also make great ones. So I said Duo, so let's start there. I picked up Raid and said Duo. Hey, look. My mind is in crazy place. I'm ready for, it's Orion time, is what it is, Jeff. Duo Wriggle Stick. So this is a bait that kind of bridges the gap between a Senko and like a cover scat. Now I didn't put a cover scat in here because it doesn't really do anything on the drop. It's not like a Senko where it has like that action. Cover scat really designed to just get to the bottom quick and then more hop like a jig less than a Senko, right? So the Wriggle Stick is a cool one. Will it let me in? Success. Okay, so kind of similar. It's a heavy weighted plastic. I know it looks kind of crazy, but as this falls, it's got a tremendous amount of kick, so it's actually falling and kind of thumping as it falls, right? So again, you can rig it weedless. 3/0 hook is great on this, 4/0 as well. And you're gonna get that kind of tail thump as it falls. It's gonna be more for like fishing deeper water, deeper points, but that could be a really good alternative as well. And then going back to the more finesse side, Raid makes a really good heavyweight version of the Fat Whip. This is gonna be more of a finesse, like if you're throwing a 4-inch Senko and you want an alternative, this would be a really good one. Just wacky rig it, throw it out there, and it really has a real kind of hard thump as it falls. That could be a good one as well. So any of those could make great alternatives to a Senko that'll give you just a little bit different look. All right, guys, that is a wrap. Hopefully, maybe there's a tidbit in there. Maybe you picked up something on a hook or a different bait that could be an alternative. Jeff, did I inspire you to put down the swim bait and pick up the Senko?
I'm selling all my swim bait stuff, and I'm buying 100,000 bags of Senkos.
Finally, you're gonna catch some fish.
Finally.
Yes.
Every fish in the lake's mine.
It's gonna be good to have you come in here and show me some pics on your phone now.
Yeah, from half pounders to 20 pounders.
That's it. It's the only thing you need, Jeff. Goodbye, clashes and slide
all
swimmers.
the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, this
I-
thing's sinking
I
really
can't-
slow. Doesn't sound
In
fun.
30 feet of water on a long...
Hey, you know what? If it gets bit,
Yep.
sometimes we need to do it. So hopefully that was insightful. If you guys have any tips or tricks of your own that I didn't discuss, please drop it down below in the comments because I want us to collectively share info and get better as a group. But if you have any questions for me on anything we discussed, drop that down below as well, and I will get an answer for you. Jeff will leave links to all of these. Guys, on behalf of myself and Jeff and everybody here at the Hookup Tackle, thank you for watching our videos. Thank you for your support and business. I hope you have an amazing spring. I hope you can just catch them on a square bill all spring. But should you have to slow down and be a little more finessey, enjoy your Senko time of the year, guys. Have a great season. Peace out. We'll see you again soon. Later.